Thank you for your time today. Look forward to having this opportunity to really dive into how we see the regulatory surveillance market evolving and changing and the role that RedOwl plays in this market. The purpose of this discussion is not going to be a deep demo of our product and our solution, rather a discussion about what we believe large global investment banks and asset managers demand today, and also where they are going to be able to go as technology continues to improve over time. With that said, let me just dive in, because there's a couple of things to cover, and I really want to talk about what the capabilities that we can put into people's hands today to make them fundamentally more effective and efficient at their day-to-day job. First, we see a challenge with the compliance team, the second line, and the front office, the first line, in how they do their existing review. They're doing it based on primarily lexicons, they're leveraging archivers, and they're only looking at a random sample. They, by very nature of this defined approach, know that they're missing a wide swath of what's possible today. The second is the first and second line know that technology can provide them capabilities that they are just not taking advantage of. And they're seeing that in their day-to-day life with whatever they use, from it's their mobile device that they use, from the ability to work remotely, to just as they observe technology around them. And we believe that they wonder, why is this technology not enabling me to do my job better? And frankly, spend more time if I'm in the first line trading rather than reviewing. Third, and perhaps unique to us, is what I would like to talk a little bit about how the advances and the push and the drive within the US and the UK, military and intelligence services in particular, over the past 10 to 15 years, really have driven where technology is today, especially around big data techniques. So diving in and peeling the onion back on these, a few things. We believe that you're going to be built on this idea of big data. A big data lake with unstructured and structured data together to give you the ability to really see everything first, and then also over time be much more proactive. This is particularly germane as once you have a better technology solution in place, you have the ability to ensure that your culture lives up to that. And we believe that that's very important from a cultural perspective. The second is, what can be delivered today, but also where the technology is moving. And I think this is particularly germane among some of the world's largest banks that have really looked in the past to do homegrown development for their solutions, but are now opening up their eyes a little bit more and realizing that, we may get better value out of working with a few select vendors and working in cognizant with others in the industry to compound the knowledge and make the platform better to solve our needs. And that is important because the company that is chosen today to solve these problems that we're talking about here needs to be a long-term partner. This is not something that anybody, whether it's RedOwl or anybody else in this industry that has the full suite of capabilities fully developed, knows exactly what is needed, can stay ahead of where the technology is going and the regulations. What the most important thing is somebody that can partner with you and make sure that it's going to continue to deliver above and beyond what your expectations are. And, the final point on this slide is that this is not just a technology. And as I alluded to earlier with the culture point, this is something about training your people as well as having the right processes in place that is going to enable you to really have the overall solution necessary to be more effective and efficient in the first and the second line. The observations, I believe, are important because, we hear all of these quite often. We do meetings over and over again in New York and London, mostly on a weekly basis. And we're talking to, have the good fortune to really talk to some of the bluest chip names in the world. And some of the things that we hear is that, hey, I've got a problem with my data. My data is a mess. Well, you know what? Everybody's got that same problem. And, that's where, you have to realize that it's going to take some time to clean up that data, understand where it is, get it in place, and get it ready to ingest it by, whichever technology you choose. There isn't a large, global enterprise that that has, clean data. Everybody has data in a lot of stovepipe systems. The challenge is pulling it in today, but then also figuring out the process to ensure that that can happen in a streaming fashion going forward. The second is, how do you leverage technology as a forcing function? Many people say, hey, I need to get, my process in place, or I need to make a new hire first, or it's a lot of excuses. We've often found that those that have just gone head on into the technology have been able to move rapidly ahead, because it does become a forcing function when you are spending money, you do have a vendor in place, and you do have to deliver capability. And those institutions that have kind of charged ahead, I think are very happy with where they are now. Make no mistake, they have gone through some real pain in getting there, but they're fundamentally ahead of those that are trying to align everything first and then pick the technology vendor. Third point is, what should we do between the first and the second line? As the listeners of this would know, each institution has a different definition of what the first line and the second line does. Notwithstanding that, the nomenclature, what the reality is that whoever is going to do your first line supervisory review should be using the same platform in the second line compliance review and then in the third line audit review. It does not make sense to buy multiple technologies for fundamentally the same review. And what's more important is to have the technology that can enable you to be configured to ensure that multiple people with multiple roles can access the same system. The fourth, and I alluded to this on the previous slide, but really, resist the desire to do it yourself. We believe, whether it's us or many of our great competitors out there, that there are some really good technologies that are fundamentally going to be better than something that can be built internally. Take us, for example. We have nearly $30 million of venture capital invested in this company so far. We're working with several of the world's largest, financial institutions, and we're learning from each of them. And that learning enables us to push our customers along very quickly. And that's something that I think that the financial firms are taking advantage of in this space, and I'd encourage others to do the same. The Wells Fargo breach, you have to bring it up since the date that we're recording this. Breach is probably not the right word, but really the issue and the challenge at Wells Fargo in regards to how could they enable such a culture to exist for so long without really casting an opinion on what the right solution should have been. I would submit that if they did have a piece of technology in place, maybe they may not have caught this bad behavior. They may very well could have, and happy to discuss that at a later time. But what they would have had is they would have had a better answer to what are you doing to ensure this does not happen again. And they would be able to say that we've got a combination of the right leadership, the right culture, the right process, and the right technology to check on the culture and the process. Because the reality is, as much as you want to believe that you have the best culture that insists on compliance, if you don't have a way to check that, you really are left with just trusting everybody. And we see how that has worked out. Increasingly, you still hear that this idea of random samples and lexicons are getting a bad rap. Our perspective is these are still very important techniques. They're tried and true. They do give you some insight into what's going on. The important thing is how can you, again, compound? How can you learn which lexicons are working? How can you continue to update them in real time? How can you learn over time about the language that is changing? Because another observation is oftentimes, supervisory reviewers are still learning the language that their younger traders are using because of how quickly that changes. And this is even more compounded by those that switch back and forth between multiple languages on trading floors. And so this is why you need to keep using every possible technique to ensure that you're staying ahead. And the final point on this slide, and something that is obviously a thematic of this webinar, is this idea of a partnership. And that is ultimately what's going to enable the right technology to be in place and enable the financial firms to have a platform for the proper review. So why now, you may ask? And what has fundamentally happened? You know, back to where we started, the ability of the database technology, whether it was the one that everybody's most familiar with, you know, probably Hadoop and the open source movement there, or our taking advantage of Elastic as our back end, that has enabled you to fundamentally house the data, stream the data in real time, and horizontally scale to give you a solution to monitor, you know, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. That's a fundamental difference in where technology is. The second is, you know, analytics. The analytic techniques can run on this data as it's streamed in. That is also a big change over time. The third is something that we're hearing about, and everybody that's listening obviously knows quite well, and that's the commodity infrastructure. And how, you know, whether it's taking advantage of, you know, AWS, which we can deploy on, or we deploy on-prem, the cost of the infrastructure and the cost of storage have gone down so quickly that you can deliver this type of capability. You know, of us, and, you know, we are running on the same back end that Netflix uses to drive their review recommendations. And that's an important thing to keep in mind when you think about the scale upon which they operate, which gives you confidence in our ability to scale. The second is the people. I mean, the people, as we know, you know, the ability for data scientists to dive in to the problem. They not only understand just the math, but they are understanding the problem. And they're enabling us to really drive this, you know, and iterate at a rapid pace. You know, you don't have to, there's more of them available, and they're more interested in these problems. And finally, it's, you know, how do you get your people more trained to do this? And so to us, by the interest of the people, by the data scientists, by the technology, it all comes together to suggest that we are ready for these types of systems to be deployed. And that's a combination of what I've alluded to and won't repeat on the technology side, which is important because you have the right people. You know, what is possible? The possibilities in surveillance are, you know, this is a great chart, I think, to give you a sense of where we are today and where we're going. And, you know, a noise problem. This is a big deal. And, hey, I'm looking at my review sample, I'm seeing the same noise. So how do you reduce those false positives? Well, you do that with a few different NLP techniques around zoning and threading and sentiment, where you're really starting to understand the nature of the communication, and you're filtering data out. This gives you a much better review sample, but fundamentally makes you more efficient at your job. That is just getting better and better, and we believe that that's going to be at 90% reduction. You know, find the bad guy. You know, the ability to ingest this data together and apply analytics across multiple data sources. And this is a big change to think about. Instead of just doing an email review in an archiver and then doing a trade review and a trade bet, we have the ability today to actually bring that data together, determine if something transpired in a chat, in an e-com that then triggered a trade, or vice versa. You know, what is you know, going on here? How do you tell the story holistically? And when we see that going, is we see that going where banks are going to take advantage of physical badging data. They're going to take advantage of VPN logs. They're really going to look at what you do each and every day, every interaction you have, where you produce, if you will, a piece of digital exhaust, a digital log, and how do you amalgamate them together, apply analytics to understand that there may be some nefarious population. The third is, you know, by nature of what we're doing, you can cover everybody rather than just a random sample. And I often like to use the example based on my background about the port security and cargo security. Those that listen may remember 2004, 2005, there was a lot of discussion around, hey, can we get nuke in a box? And there was a big claim that, listen, you're only looking at 5% of the boxes. You know, that isn't enough. And you need to look at everybody, because how do we trust that that's right? And what was ultimately put in place was a system that enabled you to score and rank and look at everything, and then only inspect your highest risk. And that's the same thing now. Instead of this random sample approach to surveillance, you're going to look at everybody, but you're going to look at everybody
with automated analytic techniques. And then you're going to really just review those that are scoring the highest. So it's going to give you the perspective of not knowing ahead of time who you believe is the highest risk individual. And therefore, it's giving you a much greater oversight capability across your institution. And the fourth is, information sharing. The reality is, whether I said it earlier about working together in partnership, compounding knowledge, there's a real thirst from our customers and our partners to learn what others are doing in this industry. And realizing that they don't have all the solutions themselves and that they need to leverage knowledge, whether it's lexicons, whether it's entities. And we see that very analogous to the security. An institution like the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the FSI-SAC, came together to enable the financial institutions to share information around, counterterrorism as well as cybersecurity. That's the same ethos that I think is starting to prevail in the first and the second line, where they're realizing that there isn't necessarily a competitive advantage to being compliant. Rather, the advantage is how can we compound our knowledge and work better together to ensure that we're not going to be the institution that does indeed have an issue. Analytic techniques. This is a lot of information here. And I think that it's probably best for me to just pause for a moment here and let people just absorb this rather than read this through. But essentially, prior to the pause, this shows you the techniques that we have in place and why we believe it's the combination of these techniques together that really enables us to deliver the value back to the end user. So hopefully what this gives everybody is a quick guide. This may be a great subject for a future webinar for us by one of our data scientists to dive into what these techniques mean, how we really use them. But I think that this starts to give some definition around terms that unfortunately are thrown around quite often, whether it's natural language processing or NLP or machine learning. It's a little bit of everything rather than just saying, hey, we only do machine. Where are we going with the solutions and why it matters? To me, it's scalability. What are what technologies are going to give the ability to cover your entire organization? And over time, I do believe it will be your entire organization. It won't be just your monitored and surveilled traders and your monitored population. In fact, it's going to be everybody because this is a data exfiltration problem at the end of the day. This is a rogue employee problem at the end of the day. And that's how we see it evolving over time and which vendors do have the capability to scale to hundreds of thousands of people. Second is how you're going to be integrating voice. This is coming quicker. Some banks are already ahead of it, where voice is going to not just be recorded, but now needs to be analyzed. And the techniques around voice have gotten quite a bit better. The transcription's getting good. And we believe that that's going to be an important capability to demonstrate that, as a supervisor, you can look across your email, your chat, your voice, and your trades, and then throw in enrichment data to really understand what's transpired. And you want to be able to, in the same exact tool, listen to the recording. You want to know why did somebody change modality of communication, where they went from a chat to a phone call, or went from a phone call to an email. And doing this in real time is part of that as well. The workflow, the user interface. This is really, would look to particularly our founder and his background as an Army officer that had the experience of working with technologies to realize that you want a piece of technology that's a force multiplier. We don't believe that technology is going to replace the human individual. Rather, you want your visualization and your front end to enable you to do your review quicker, better, and derive insights that you would not normally be able to, in the ability to move around data types, pivot on the entity, dive into the audit, but have all that capability at your fingertips. So as you drive ahead, you're going to be better. The third is analytics. And as I mentioned earlier, To us, it's multiple techniques. But frankly, what I would suggest to everybody that's listening here, it's really the ability to understand what these terms mean first. And then second, understand what you need, what you're capable of. Because, your first, if you use a bad analogy perhaps, people's first car is not going to be driving, Porsche. They're going to probably start with something else as they get more comfortable driving, and then they're going to get a performance type machine. I would say that that's a similar approach to how you're going to want to do, review and iterate. You're not going to want to all of a sudden have a proactive and machine learning driven review cycle. First of all, that's not going to satisfy the regulators. But second, you want to be proven that you're doing it right. And that is why learn the techniques, learn the language, and then really determine what you need. And then finally, it's the data. It's how can you bring the data together, and how can the data model be flexible to handle the multiple pieces. And I think all of these are just as important in how you derive which technology platforms are important for your institution. I'm nearing the end of this webinar, and I've made a few references to the backgrounds on security. And I think it's always a nice thing to kind of drive to at the conclusion of a presentation is, hey, in security, and what we've learned there is you need as much context as possible. One piece of data is one piece of data. You need a lot of data to make a decision to recommend action. And now you have the capability to fundamentally, one, bring multiple data types together, structured and unstructured. Two, demand that investigation out of the same platform. And three, increase your understanding of, indeed, what has transpired. So when you make a recommendation to take action, whether that's termination, whether that's suspension of privileges, that you have the context, and that's important. Second would be technology as a force multiplier. I brought this up earlier in the workflow comments, but you really need the technology to enable you to do your job and your team's job better. It can't be something that makes your job harder, and it's laborious to go into the tool. You want to deploy the latest and greatest systems, because fundamentally you're going to get more time back and you're going to be able to do more. And we think it's both. It's both the efficiency and the effectiveness of what you need as a first or a second line reviewer. Third is ruthless in your definition of threats and tolerance. Each institution's tolerance is probably a bit different, but how they view the overall threat to the institution has to be defined early. And you have to communicate that, because by very nature of communicating what you believe is risky behavior in a robust manner, seconded by having a piece of technology to check on it, you're going to enhance your team's ability and frankly create that culture of compliance. And then finally, it comes down to people. To us, technology, as I've said this often now, it's not the only part of the issue in creating a conduct and culture regime or improving the conduct and culture regime. It's but a piece of the solution, and the people are just as important. So, in sum, big data, our technology, others' technologies are fundamentally capable to improve your workflow and your process today. The changing regulatory landscape, as well as the changing venture environment, that there's only going to be a few vendors that are going to be able to keep up with this, and that you need to be able to ensure that you're investing in not just the right technology, but the right team with the right investors to ensure that you're picking the companies that are going to be there for the long term. Third, it's embracing surveillance as a discipline. This is a discipline. Some of the leading institutions are really creating teams here and continue to look to the outside world. But really what we mean by that is look to your peers, look to your colleagues, continue to challenge what's the right techniques. And I think that's really the nice sequitur into the network effect. Over time, whether it's the technology or the people, each are going to get better with the ethos of information sharing. So, what I would want to do is just thank you for your time today. It's been a real pleasure, and we'd love to continue this in person or follow up via phone call. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.